We begin tonight with breaking news that has sent shockwaves through Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, and raised urgent questions about gang violence in our suburban communities. What should have been an ordinary Friday evening turned into a scene of chaos and bloodshed when rival motorcycle gang members engaged in a brazen shootout that left 6 people wounded in multiple crime scenes across the county. This is not just another crime story. This is a stark reminder that organized criminal violence can erupt anywhere, at any time, transforming familiar places into war zones. The incident we're covering tonight unfolded at locations many of us visit regularly: a Wawa convenience store, a neighborhood street, places where families shop, where commuters stop for gas, where life's mundane routines unfold. The fact that gang members chose these public spaces for their violent confrontation reveals a disturbing disregard for innocent lives and community safety. Tonight, we're dedicating extended coverage to help you understand not just what happened, but why it happened, who's involved, and what it means for communities across our region. We'll examine the organizations behind this violence, the law enforcement response, the impact on victims and communities, and the broader implications for public safety. This is a complex story that requires us to look beyond the headlines and understand the deeper currents of organized crime that flow beneath the surface of suburban life. The term blue wave violence has become increasingly familiar to law enforcement officials, tracking the activities of the Pagans motorcycle club, one of the most dangerous outlaw organizations operating in the northeastern United States. What we witnessed Friday night may be the most brazen manifestation yet of a pattern of violence that has been building for months, if not years. Stay with us as we unpack this developing story and provide you with the context you need to understand what happened and what comes next. The incident, a detailed reconstruction. Let's begin by carefully reconstructing the events of Friday evening, October 19th, 2025. Our timeline is based on police reports, witness statements, and our ongoing investigation. At approximately 9:15 p.m., the first emergency calls began flooding into Montgomery County 911 dispatchers. The initial reports were of shots fired at the Wawa convenience store located in West Norriton Township, a busy commercial area along a major thoroughfare. Witnesses inside the store described a terrifying scene. One customer, who asked not to be identified, told investigators she was paying for her purchase when she heard what she initially thought were fireworks. "It was pop, pop, pop," she recalled, "and then I saw people running and screaming. Someone yelled, 'Get down!' and I just dropped to the floor." The realization that these weren't fireworks, but gunshots sent customers and employees scrambling for cover, seeking shelter behind counters, in restrooms, anywhere that might offer protection from flying bullets. Outside, near the gas pumps, the violence was even more intense. Security camera footage, which police are still analyzing, reportedly shows multiple individuals exchanging gunfire. The fact that this occurred near active fuel pumps is deeply disturbing. A stray bullet striking a gas pump or a vehicle being fueled could have resulted in an explosion that would have turned this incident from a tragedy into a catastrophe. That this worst-case scenario didn't materialize is perhaps the only fortunate aspect of this entire situation. 3 individuals were struck by gunfire at the Wawa location. Emergency medical services arrived within minutes, finding a chaotic scene with wounded individuals, panicked witnesses, and the very real possibility that armed suspects might still be in the immediate vicinity. Paramedics working under police protection provided emergency treatment before transporting the victims to nearby Einstein Medical Center, Montgomery, and other area trauma centers. The severity of their injuries has not been publicly disclosed, but sources indicate at least one victim sustained life-threatening wounds. While first responders were still working the scene at the Wawa, additional calls came in reporting another shooting just a few miles away on DeKalb Street in Bridgeport. This second location presented its own unique challenges. DeKalb Street is a residential and commercial mixed-use area, with apartments above street-level businesses and homes nearby. The sounds of gunfire in this neighborhood sent residents fleeing from their homes or sheltering in place, uncertain whether the violence might spread or whether additional shots might ring out. At the Bridgeport location, 3 more individuals were wounded by gunfire. However, unlike at the Wawa, police arriving at this scene found multiple individuals still present. Several were taken into custody immediately, though it remains unclear at this hour which of those detained are suspects, which might be witnesses, and which might be additional victims. The chaotic nature of gang violence makes these determinations complex, as individuals may fit into multiple categories, perhaps wounded themselves while also participating in the violence. The connection between these two scenes is a critical focus of the ongoing investigation. The proximity in both time and distance suggests these weren't coincidental separate incidents. Several scenarios are possible. The violence may have begun at the Wawa and continued as participants fled to or pursued others to the Bridgeport location. Alternatively, this could have been a coordinated attack planned at multiple locations simultaneously. Another possibility is that the second shooting was retaliation for the first, carried out within minutes by associates of those targeted initially. Each of these scenarios has different implications for the charges that might be filed and the investigative approaches needed. Understanding outlaw motorcycle gangs, the Pagans MC. To understand what happened Friday night and why, we need to examine the world of outlaw motorcycle gangs, and specifically the Pagans Motorcycle Club. For many people, the term motorcycle club might conjure images of weekend riders enjoying the freedom of the open road. That's not what we're discussing here. Outlaw motorcycle gangs are sophisticated criminal organizations that use the culture and trappings of motorcycle clubs as a front for organized crime. The Pagans Motorcycle Club was founded in Prince George's County, Maryland in 1959 by Lou Dobkin, who was then just 13 years old. What began as a group of young motorcycle enthusiasts evolved over the decades into one of the most feared criminal organizations on the East Coast. The transformation wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, as the organization embraced an outlaw identity and began engaging in serious criminal activity. Today, the Pagans are considered one of the big four outlaw motorcycle gangs in the United States, alongside the Hells Angels, the Outlaws, and the Bandidos. This designation isn't honorary. It reflects both the size of the organization and its capacity for violence and criminal enterprise. Law enforcement estimates the Pagans have between 1,300 and 1,400 active members spread across more than 40 chapters, primarily in the mid-Atlantic and northeastern states, though their reach extends into the South and Midwest. The organizational structure of the Pagans mirrors that of traditional organized crime families. At the top is the Mother Club, the organization's governing body, which sets policy and resolves disputes between chapters. Below that are regional chapters, each with its own leadership structure, including a president, vice president, sergeant-at-arms, and other officers. This hierarchy allows for both centralized control and local autonomy, making the organization flexible and difficult to dismantle. What makes the Pagans particularly dangerous is their documented involvement in serious criminal activity. Federal and state investigations have linked the organization to drug trafficking, particularly methamphetamine, cocaine, and marijuana. They've been implicated in illegal weapon sales, prostitution, theft rings, and extortion. Violence is both a means to these criminal ends and an end in itself, used to maintain control over territory, enforce internal discipline, and intimidate rivals and law-abiding citizens alike. The Pagans' relationship with other outlaw motorcycle gangs is complex and often violent. They have a long-standing rivalry with the Hells Angels, which has resulted in numerous violent confrontations over the years. The Pagans view the northeastern United States as their territory and have violently resisted incursions by other organizations. This territorial mentality, combined with disputes over drug distribution networks and personal grievances, creates a volatile mix that can explode into violence with little warning. Understanding the Pagans' culture is important for understanding the violence we witnessed Friday night. The organization emphasizes loyalty above all else, with betrayal often resulting in severe consequences, including death. Members are expected to put the club before family, before employment, before everything. This creates an environment where violence in defense of the club or fellow members is not just accepted, but expected. The willingness to use violence, even in public spaces, with the certainty of law enforcement response, demonstrates either the depth of commitment expected or the severity of the provocations involved. The symbolism and identification markers of the Pagans are also significant. Members wear distinctive patches, including the club's colors, a vest or jacket bearing patches that identify their membership and rank. The Pagans' colors feature a blue design, which is why law enforcement has begun using the term blue wave to describe periods of elevated pagan-related violence. These colors are sacred to gang members. Disrespecting them or attempting to take them from a member is considered among the gravest offenses and can trigger immediate violent retaliation. The blue wave, a pattern of escalating violence. The term blue wave violence didn't emerge from a single incident, but from a pattern that law enforcement agencies have been tracking with growing concern over the past several years. What we witnessed Friday night in Montgomery County is unfortunately not an isolated incident, but rather the latest and perhaps most brazen manifestation of escalating violence involving the Pagans Motorcycle Club. To understand this pattern, we need to look back at incidents over the past few years. In 2023, a confrontation between Pagans members and a rival gang at a bar in New Jersey resulted in multiple injuries and led to racketeering charges against several high-ranking Pagans members. That same year, Delaware State Police investigated a series of arsons at businesses that had refused to pay protection money to Pagans-affiliated enforcers. In 2024, a shootout at a Maryland motorcycle rally left 2 dead and sparked a multi-state investigation into gun trafficking within the organization. What makes this pattern particularly concerning is the apparent willingness of gang members to engage in violence in increasingly public settings. Early confrontations might occur at bars known to be gang hangouts or at motorcycle events where multiple gangs congregate. More recent incidents have occurred at shopping centers, restaurants, and now a Wawa convenience store during busy evening hours. This escalation suggests either that internal and external pressures have become so intense that normal restraints no longer apply, or that the organization has become so emboldened that it no longer fears the consequences of public violence. Law enforcement analysts have identified several factors driving this wave of violence. First, there's evidence of internal instability within the Pagans organization. Leadership disputes, debates over criminal strategy, and generational tensions between older members who remember the club's earlier days and younger members who've known only the outlaw lifestyle have created fractures. These internal tensions sometimes explode into violence as different factions vie for control. Second, external pressures from rival organizations have intensified. The Hells Angels, the Pagans' primary rival, have been attempting to expand their presence in areas the Pagans consider their territory. Each incursion, whether real or perceived, demands a response, and that response often takes the form of violence. The refusal to cede ground becomes a matter of organizational pride and individual reputation. Third, law enforcement's success in dismantling some of the Pagans' criminal operations has ironically contributed to violence. As traditional revenue streams like drug distribution networks are disrupted, competition over remaining opportunities intensifies. Members under financial pressure may take greater risks, leading to sloppier operations and more frequent violent confrontations. Additionally, successful prosecutions that remove leadership create power vacuums that ambitious members compete to fill, often violently. Fourth, the proliferation of weapons and the militarization of gang culture have made confrontations more deadly. Where previous generations might have settled disputes with fists or at most knives, contemporary gang members routinely carry firearms and aren't hesitant to use them. The same firearms that are part of the illegal weapons trade become the tools of gang warfare. Intelligence gathered by law enforcement suggests that Friday night's shootings may be connected to a specific territorial dispute. Without compromising ongoing investigations, sources indicate that the Pagans have been in conflict with another organization over drug distribution rights in Montgomery County. This prosperous suburban area represents lucrative territory, and neither organization is willing to relinquish control. What may have begun as posturing and threats escalated to the violence we witnessed. The blue wave terminology adopted by law enforcement serves multiple purposes. It helps agencies track and categorize incidents for pattern analysis. It facilitates information sharing between jurisdictions, as an incident classified as blue wave violence in New Jersey immediately alerts Pennsylvania authorities to be vigilant. And frankly, it helps the public understand that these aren't random acts of violence by individuals, but coordinated actions by an organized criminal enterprise. Law enforcement response and investigation. The law enforcement response to Friday night's shootings was immediate, massive, and multi-jurisdictional, reflecting both the serious nature of the violence and the sophisticated protocols that agencies have developed for dealing with gang-related incidents. Understanding this response helps us appreciate the complexity of investigating and prosecuting gang violence. When the first 911 calls came in reporting shots fired at the Wawa in West Norriton Township, the initial response came from West Norriton Township Police. However, within minutes, the response expanded to include Pennsylvania State Police, Montgomery County detectives, and officers from neighboring jurisdictions. This rapid multi-agency response is standard protocol for active shooter situations and reflects the reality that gang violence often doesn't respect municipal boundaries. The initial priorities at any shooting scene are securing the area, providing medical assistance to the wounded, and identifying and apprehending suspects. At the Wawa, officers arriving on scene found chaos. Wounded individuals needed immediate help, but officers also needed to ensure no additional threats were present. Witnesses were scattered, some having fled the immediate area in panic, others sheltering in place inside the store or in their vehicles. Each witness needed to be located, separated from others to prevent story coordination, and interviewed while memories were fresh. The physical evidence collection at the Wawa scene was extensive and will take weeks to fully process. Shell casings need to be located, photographed in place, and collected. Each casing can provide information about what type of weapon was used and, through ballistic analysis, potentially be matched to specific firearms. Bullets or bullet fragments need to be recovered from vehicles, the building structure, and tragically, from victims. Security cameras, both from the Wawa and from surrounding businesses, need to be identified and their footage preserved and analyzed. The gas pumps where much of the violence occurred presented unique investigative challenges. Blood evidence needed to be documented and collected before weather or other factors could compromise it. Vehicles present during the shooting needed to be examined for bullet strikes, glass fragments, and other evidence. Vehicle owners needed to be identified and interviewed. Anyone who had been fueling a vehicle at the time would be a critical witness. When reports of the second shooting on DeKalb Street in Bridgeport came in, the law enforcement response had to be divided between the two active scenes, while also considering the possibility of additional violence at other locations. The proximity and timing suggested a connection, which meant detectives needed to begin coordinating their investigations immediately, rather than treating them as separate incidents. This coordination is crucial for building comprehensive cases that reflect the full scope of the criminal activity. At the Bridgeport location, police encountered a somewhat different situation. Multiple individuals were still present when officers arrived, and several were taken into custody. The legal and practical complexities of this can't be overstated. Who was an active participant in the violence? Who was present but not involved? Who might be a victim in addition to being a potential witness or even suspect? Each detained individual has constitutional rights that must be respected even as investigators work to untangle what happened. The investigative techniques being employed in this case represent the cutting edge of gang investigation methodology. Ballistic analysis will attempt to match weapons used in both locations to determine if the same firearms were present at both scenes, which would establish a clear connection. Cell phone records will be subpoenaed to establish communication patterns before and during the incidents. Who was calling or texting whom and when? Cell tower data can place individuals at specific locations at specific times, corroborating or contradicting their statements. Social media analysis has become increasingly important in gang investigations. Gang members often document their activities, rivalries, and threats on social media platforms. Posts, photos, and messages from the days and weeks leading up to Friday's violence may provide crucial context about building tensions. Even seemingly innocuous posts, photos showing who's associating with whom, check-ins at particular locations, comments on others' posts, can provide investigators with valuable intelligence. Forensic accounting will play a role in the broader investigation, if not in prosecuting the immediate violence, then in understanding the criminal enterprise that provides context for it. Following money trails helps establish the scope of criminal operations, identify leadership figures, and build racketeering cases that can result in much more severe penalties than simple assault or weapons charges. The Montgomery County District Attorney's Office faces complex charging decisions. For those who can be definitively identified as having fired weapons, attempted murder charges are appropriate. But what about those who were present but whose specific actions are unclear? Pennsylvania law allows for accomplice liability, meaning individuals who aided or encouraged the criminal conduct can be charged even if they didn't personally fire a shot. Conspiracy charges might apply if prosecutors can prove that multiple individuals planned the violence in advance. Federal involvement is likely, given the interstate nature of outlaw motorcycle gangs. The FBI has dedicated resources to investigating these organizations, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, ATF, has particular expertise in weapons trafficking cases. Federal prosecutors have access to statutes like RICO, Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, that allow them to prosecute the organization itself, not just individual members for individual crimes. These federal cases are complex and time-consuming to build, but can be devastatingly effective in dismantling criminal enterprises. The ripple effects of Friday night's violence extend far beyond the immediate victims, touching every aspect of community life in West Norriton Township, Bridgeport, and the broader Montgomery County area. Understanding these impacts helps us appreciate why gang violence, even when it primarily affects gang members themselves, is a community crisis that demands a comprehensive response. Let's begin with the immediate economic and social impacts on the Wawa and surrounding businesses. The Wawa, where the initial shooting occurred, will likely experience a significant, if hopefully temporary, decline in business. Some customers will avoid the location out of fear, at least in the short term. Evening traffic in particular may drop as people who previously stopped on their way home from work choose alternative routes or different stores. This impacts not just the company's bottom line, but also the employees whose hours might be reduced as a result. Neighboring businesses face similar challenges. Even though the violence didn't occur at their locations, proximity creates association in customers' minds. A restaurant next door, a retail shop across the street, all might see reduced foot traffic as people avoid the entire area. For small businesses operating on thin margins, even a temporary decline in revenue can be catastrophic. Commercial property values in the immediate area may also be affected, at least temporarily. The psychological impact on the community is harder to quantify, but no less real. West Norriton Township and Bridgeport are communities where people have chosen to live, work, and raise families based on perceptions of safety and quality of life. Gang violence that erupts in public spaces challenges those perceptions and forces residents to reconsider their sense of security. Will parents allow their teenagers to walk to that Wawa for snacks after school? Will elderly residents feel safe pumping gas there in the evening? These small changes in behavior, multiplied across hundreds or thousands of residents, fundamentally alter the character of a community. Schools in the area face particular challenges. Students who may have been at or near the shooting locations, or who know people who were, need support processing their reactions. School counselors and psychologists will be dealing with heightened anxiety, questions about safety, and in some cases, students who have personal connections to gang culture through family members or friends. Teachers report that violence in the community impacts classroom behavior and academic performance as students struggle to focus while processing trauma and fear. Places of worship in the affected areas play a critical role in community response. Churches, synagogues, mosques, and other faith communities often serve as gathering places where people can process collective trauma, receive support, and organize community responses. Religious leaders may hold special services or prayer sessions, provide counseling, and help coordinate community meetings to address concerns and plan responses. The path forward: prevention, intervention, and prosecution. As Montgomery County and the broader region grapple with the aftermath of Friday night's violence, attention must turn to the critical question: what happens next? The path forward requires a multifaceted approach that addresses immediate security concerns, prosecutes those responsible, disrupts the criminal organizations involved, and addresses the underlying factors that allow gang culture to flourish. On the law enforcement front, we can expect intensified scrutiny of gang activity in Montgomery County and surrounding areas. Police presence will likely increase in commercial areas and locations where gang members are known to congregate. This visible presence serves multiple purposes. It deters further violence by increasing the likelihood of arrest, it reassures community members, and it gathers intelligence on gang movements and associations. However, increased police presence alone is not a complete solution and must be part of a broader strategy. The prosecution of those arrested in connection with Friday's shootings will send an important message about consequences for gang violence. District attorneys will seek substantial prison sentences not just to punish individual crimes, but to demonstrate to the broader gang community that such violence will not be tolerated. We can expect to see attempted murder charges, aggravated assault, conspiracy, weapons violations, and potentially charges under organized crime statutes. The goal is to secure convictions that result in lengthy sentences, removing dangerous individuals from the streets for years or even decades. Beyond individual prosecutions, broader efforts to dismantle the Pagans organization in this region will intensify. Federal investigators have likely been building cases for months or years, and Friday's violence may accelerate their timelines. RICO prosecutions targeting the organization's leadership and structure can be devastatingly effective, but they require extensive evidence of a pattern of criminal activity in organizational structure. Expect to see a long-term federal investigation that may result in sweeping indictments months or even years from now. Financial pressure on gang operations is another critical strategy. Following money trails to identify and seize assets obtained through criminal activity undermines the economic foundations of gang operations. If members can't profit from their crimes, the incentive for involvement decreases. This requires sophisticated forensic accounting and coordination between law enforcement and financial institutions, but it can be highly effective. Community-based prevention and intervention programs represent perhaps the most important long-term strategy. These programs work to keep young people from joining gangs in the first place and to help current members exit gang life safely. Effective programs provide positive alternatives, mentorship, education, job training, recreational opportunities that address the needs that gangs exploit. They also work with families to provide support and resources that can counteract gang recruitment efforts. Exit programs for current gang members are particularly challenging, but critically important. Individuals who want to leave gang life face enormous obstacles: threats from their former associates, lack of legitimate employment opportunities due to criminal records, ongoing trauma and behavioral patterns from years of gang involvement, and the simple practical challenge of rebuilding a life from scratch. Programs that provide protection, job training, counseling, and community support can make the difference between successful transition and return to gang life or death. Education plays a crucial role in prevention. Young people need to understand the reality of gang life, stripped of the glamour and false promises. They need to hear from former gang members about the violence, incarceration, and early deaths that characterize this lifestyle. They need to understand how gangs exploit vulnerabilities and how the promise of belonging, protection, and wealth is a trap that leads to destruction. Schools, youth organizations, and community groups all have roles to play in this education. Economic development in communities where gangs recruit is essential. When legitimate opportunities exist, gang membership becomes less attractive. Job training programs, small business support, investment in education, and community infrastructure all contribute to creating environments where young people can envision positive futures outside gang culture. This is a long-term investment, but it addresses root causes in ways that enforcement alone cannot. Treatment for substance abuse and mental health issues must be part of a comprehensive approach. Many individuals involved in gang culture are self-medicating trauma, depression, or other mental health conditions. Others have substance abuse issues that both result from and contribute to their gang involvement. Accessible, affordable treatment that addresses these underlying issues can help individuals break the cycle of addiction and violence. Collaboration between law enforcement and communities is essential but often challenging. In communities that have experienced over-policing or police violence, trust is lacking, and residents may be reluctant to cooperate with investigations or prevention efforts. Building this trust requires sustained effort, genuine community engagement, accountability for police misconduct, and recognition of the legitimate concerns that community members bring to these conversations. Regional and national coordination is necessary, given that outlaw motorcycle gangs operate across state lines and even internationally. Information sharing between law enforcement agencies, coordinated operations, and consistent prosecution strategies prevent gang members from simply relocating to jurisdictions where enforcement is less aggressive. Federal agencies play a crucial coordinating role, but success requires cooperation from local and state authorities who have the frontline contact with these organizations. As we close this extended coverage, it's important to recognize that there are no quick fixes or simple solutions to the challenge of gang violence. The shootings we witnessed Friday night are symptoms of deeper problems: social disconnection, economic disadvantage, the glamorization of violence, the profitable drug trade, and the human need for belonging that gangs exploit. Addressing these root causes requires sustained commitment from all sectors of society. Law enforcement, certainly, but also schools, faith communities, businesses, social service organizations, elected officials, and individual citizens. The 6 people wounded Friday night, their families, and the broader community affected by this violence deserve our commitment to preventing future incidents. That commitment must translate into action, supporting effective prevention and intervention programs, holding elected officials accountable for comprehensive approaches to gang violence, creating economic opportunities in vulnerable communities, and building the social connections and community strength that serve as the best defense against the false promises of gang life. The investigation into Friday's shootings continues. Charges will be filed, trials will be held, and justice will be pursued through the legal system. But the larger work of preventing the next shootout, the next young person drawn into gang life, the next community traumatized by violence, that work belongs to all of us and must begin immediately. Montgomery County has experienced a tragedy, but how the community responds will determine whether this is simply another incident in an ongoing pattern or a catalyst for meaningful change. This concludes our special extended coverage. We'll continue following this story and bringing you updates as the investigation progresses and as the community works toward recovery and prevention. Thank you for staying with us for this in-depth examination of a critical issue facing our region.